What if angels were not only messengers, but architects of divine history, each assigned to execute secrets too sacred for human ears? Hidden within the ancient scroll of Jubilees lies a forgotten order of angelic missions. Why were these roles erased from our modern memory? And why did heaven seal away their names until now? Prepare to uncover the shocking truth about the untold angelic missions of Jubilees and the secrets of heaven they were sent to protect. Before the first word of Genesis was penned, before the ink of human memory touched parchment, there existed another record. One not formed by human hand, but by the fingers of flame that dwell before the throne of God. The Book of Jubilees, long concealed in the shadows of forgotten scrolls, opens a window into a deeper dimension where angels are not merely heralds of messages, but architects of remembrance. In this ancient text, we learn that the history of the world was not revealed to Moses through silent meditations or private visions alone, but by the direct ministry of an angel of presence, one who stood before God continually and whose voice carried the cadence of eternity. This angel, unnamed but divine in commission, unfolded to Moses the sacred chronology of time itself, not in riddles, but in clarity, not in generalities, but in exact counts of jubilees, weeks, days, and cycles. He spoke of beginnings not merely as moments, but as foundations upon which all things were constructed. Every generation, every covenant, every divine command was already written in heavenly books before man was formed from dust. The angel revealed that God had commanded the division of time into fixed periods, ordained from the very first day of creation. Sevenfold divisions, sacred weeks, and jubilees that would echo the order of heaven on earth. And this was no new invention. It was the reflection of a law older than Eden, one kept and enforced by the angels long before Adam opened his eyes. These angels were not passive scribes, they were witnesses. From the fall of the watchers to the rise of nations, from the trembling voice of Abraham to the thunder on Sinai, every event was recorded, categorized, and sealed by these celestial recorders in books that remain before the throne of God. Nothing escapes their ink. Nothing is too small, too hidden, or too ancient to be inscribed. They recorded the cries of Abel's blood and the covenant of Noah's altar. They documented every Sabbath broken, every vow fulfilled, every injustice left unrepented. And this recording was not for God's memory. He forgets nothing, but for judgment, for testimony, for a reckoning that will one day open every sealed scroll. These scrolls are not metaphors. They are spiritual artifacts, each one bearing the weight of heavenly authority. When Moses climbed Sinai, he was not only entering the fire of God's presence, he was being initiated into the archives of heaven. Jubilees declares that he received not merely tablets of stone, but understanding from the books of the angels, books that predated the giving of the law. These were books that chronicled the timeline of creation in divine precision, revealing the flood not merely as catastrophe, but as fulfillment of prophetic time, revealing Abraham not as a wanderer, but as one born in the exact week appointed for covenant. Everything in heaven moves according to timing, and the angels are the keepers of that motion. They know the appointed years, the hidden jubilees, and the ages of the earth. And they guard this knowledge with reverent fire, for these are not facts, they are decrees. To reject the timeline they hold is to rebel against the order of the universe. This is why Jubilees speaks with urgency about remembering time, restoring the sacred weeks, and honoring the ancient calendar, not as legalism, but as alignment with heaven's very rhythm. The angels, who measure the rise and fall of generations, are not forgotten relics of myth. They are alive, watching, writing, waiting, and in the silence between their movements lies the pulse of prophecy. Before we continue, if this content has blessed your life, like, comment, and share. Subscribe to the channel, and if you would like to bless the channel, click the super thanks button and leave an offering of any amount or become a member. That way, we can continue investing in research and improvements to bless your life even more. Now, let us return to the mystery that has echoed since eternity. For the angels did more than write. They counted, measured, and guarded the hours of God. There is a rhythm to heaven, a beat so ancient and precise that even the stars were hung to its cadence, a divine metronome that measures not only days and years, but the heartbeat of eternity itself. And it is the angels, according to the Book of Jubilees, who are entrusted with guarding this sacred rhythm, assigned as custodians of time not merely to count its passing, but to teach, defend, and enforce its holy order. The calendar of heaven is unlike any human invention. It is neither solar nor lunar, neither civil nor astrological, but eternal. It does not shift with seasons or bend with empires. It is fixed, written in heaven before the foundation of the world, immutable and sacred. When the angel of the presence spoke to Moses atop Mount Sinai, he revealed more than a law. He revealed a calendar, one that predated Moses, predated Abraham, even predated Adam. In the heavenly reckoning, time is not merely a progression, it is a covenant. The weeks of years, the cycles of jubilees, the appointments of Sabbaths and feast days, they are not cultural relics, but divine appointments. To keep them is to walk in alignment with heaven's order. To forget them is to drift into spiritual exile. And it was for this reason that angels were appointed, not just to teach, but to preserve. They taught the patriarchs the observance of Passover before Egypt ever knew its plagues. They revealed to Noah the weeks of harvest and rest long before the law of Moses was given. Abraham, according to Jubilees, celebrated the Feast of First Fruits on the exact day heaven had ordained, guided not by human priests, but by angelic instruction. Each righteous man was taught directly by the messengers of time, who guarded the 364-day calendar of heaven with a zeal that mirrored their worship. But as generations passed and nations rose, that calendar was corrupted. Lunar systems crept in, mixing pagan festivals with holy convocations, twisting the appointed times into approximations, and turning divine order into human tradition. The result was not merely confusion, it was desecration. The Book of Jubilees cries out that sin entered the world not merely through disobedience, but through the abandonment of sacred time. When the Sabbaths were forgotten, rebellion followed. When the appointed feasts were replaced with human celebrations, the angels withdrew. They could not defend a rhythm no longer recognized. And with that withdrawal came disarray, not only in Israel, but in the understanding of prophecy itself. For what is prophecy if not divine time revealed in advance? To miscalculate the calendar is to misread the prophecy. And so, the angel of time remains, watching. He sees how the world celebrates the counterfeit while forgetting the authentic. He sees how man builds systems of time divorced from creation's pattern, turning worship into convenience and holy days into holidays. Yet still, heaven waits. For the appointed times have not passed away. They have only been hidden. Buried beneath the rubble of empires and translations, the eternal calendar beats on, marked by the revolutions of heaven rather than the turning of human clocks. And to those who seek it, the angels are ready to reveal it again. Imagine then, what might happen if the people of God returned to that rhythm? If they counted not from kings and governments, but from the decrees of heaven? What if the missing key to end-time understanding lies not in new prophecy, but in ancient timekeeping? Jubilees whispers that it does. It warns that those who follow false calendars will miss divine appointments. They will fast when they should feast. They will rest when they should war. They will gather when they should scatter. The timing of God is not arbitrary. It is strategic, prophetic, redemptive. And it is guarded by angels who know the pattern of eternity, who watch creation unfold in sevenfold brilliance, who sang as the first Sabbath dawned with light untouched by sin. These angels still move in accordance with that sacred cycle, and they still long to teach those who will listen. For time is not simply what we pass through, it is what passes through us. And when heaven's calendar is restored to earth, prophecy will not feel like a puzzle, but a story coming full circle. The future will not be feared, but recognized. Because everything God does, He does on time, and His time was always guarded by angels. From the moment Adam drew his first breath, before the echo of life had even settled in Eden's stillness, angels were appointed to him, guardians not fashioned to replace his freedom, but to shepherd it. These celestial stewards, revealed in the Book of Jubilees, were assigned to every generation that emerged from his lineage, stretching from the innocence of the first garden to the corruption that darkened the days of Noah. They were witnesses, protectors, mediators, and, when commanded, instruments of divine judgment. Jubilees declares that these angels did not merely appear at milestones of history, they walked beside each soul from the womb, guarding destinies before a child ever opened its eyes to the world. Their vigilance was not passive. When a prayer rose from the lips of a righteous man, they carried it upward, bearing it before the throne like incense. And when heaven spoke, through warnings, dreams, or signs, it was these guardians who descended with the message. They were present when Cain's jealousy began to coil around his heart, whispering warnings he refused to hear. They were present when Enoch, seventh from Adam, began to walk with God, interpreting visions too weighty for human understanding. They were present when Lamech held newborn Noah in trembling arms, sensing by revelation that this child would be a hinge upon which the future of mankind would turn. Yet as humanity grew, sin grew with it. What began as subtle disobedience in the garden soon blossomed into violence that soaked the earth. Jubilees records that, as corruption increased, some angels wept, not out of weakness, but out of grief. They had watched innocence fade from generation to generation, like light swallowed by fog. They saw families turn against one another, cities build altars to gods that did not breathe, and men twist the image of their creator into something unrecognizable. The guardians assigned to guide mankind now stood before the throne, weeping with sorrow for the people they had been sent to protect. Others withdrew, not in rebellion, but in obedience. For when man hardens his heart beyond repentance, the guardianship designed to preserve him becomes a witness against him. The angelic presence that once hovered over communities grew faint as idolatry spread like wildfire. Jubilees reveals that the more mankind resisted the influence of these guardians, the more they lost their divine covering. And with that loss came disaster. Cain, wandering eastward into exile, became the first man to live without angelic protection. His descendants, driven by fear instead of faith, built cities not to honor God, but to hide from him. Lamech, Cain's descendant, boasted of murder, and the angels recorded every word. By the time of Jared, the father of Enoch, humanity had grown so corrupt that even the guardians themselves were tested. Some stood firm, grieving. Others abandoned their posts, entirely seduced by the beauty of human daughters, and became the fallen watchers who birthed corruption so terrible that the earth itself cried out beneath the weight of it. The guardianship fractured, heaven mourned, and judgment drew near. Yet even in this spiraling darkness, the faithful watchers continued their work, unseen but unshaken. They taught Enoch the courses of heaven, revealing secrets reserved for the righteous. They guided Methuselah, ensuring that the promise of Enoch's prophecies would not be forgotten. They strengthened Noah, teaching him truth in a generation that knew only wickedness. Jubilees records that angels were sent to Noah while he was still a child, preparing him for the role he would one day take, one that would divide history. These angels shielded him from the violence of his peers and instructed him in the ways of righteousness. They recorded every blow struck against the innocent, every cry of the oppressed, every injustice that stained the earth, and carried their accounts to the throne until the cup of judgment overflowed. The guardianship had not failed, mankind had rejected it. Even so, when the floodwaters were commanded to rise, angels still surrounded the ark. They did not build it, but they defended it. They stood watch as judgment fell and the old world was swept away. And when the waters receded, they walked with Noah into a new dawn, preserving the covenant God made with him and ensuring its transmission to his sons. For Jubilees reveals a hidden truth. Even after judgment, angelic guardians continued to accompany every generation. They taught Shem the ways of the Most High. They warned Ham of the consequences of rebellion. They instructed Japheth in the boundaries appointed to him. They remained, but their sorrow remained too, for they had seen how fragile the human heart could be. And though they carried prayers upward and brought warnings downward, they could not force obedience. They could only guide, protect, intervene when permitted, and testify when required. Across ages their scrolls filled. Across generations their patience endured. They saw prophets rise and kingdoms fall. They saw altars built and altars defiled. They saw children destined for righteousness and children destined for violence. And always they watched, eyes burning with the weight of eternity, hearts marked by the grief of seeing what could be and what was. Jubilees reveals that the reason judgment fell in the days of Noah was not merely human corruption. It was the collapse of the guardianship. Humanity had descended into such lawlessness that angelic intervention alone could no longer preserve creation. Only a reset could restore order. Yet still the guardians continued, for God never abandoned mankind. And even now, though unseen, they watch. They record, they defend, they whisper warnings into the hearts of those who will listen. For the guardianship that once fractured is now preparing for its final restoration, when righteousness will fill the earth again, and the angels who watched over generations past will witness the completion of the story they began before the first sunrise of Eden. There was a moment in ancient time where heaven shuddered, not from weakness, but from violation. A rift tore through the order of creation, not by the hands of men, but by the rebellion of those who were once its guardians. The Book of Jubilees reveals with piercing clarity what the scriptures only whisper: the fall of the Watchers. These were not ordinary angels. They were the appointed stewards of mankind, assigned to observe, instruct, and protect the fragile boundary between the heavenly and the earthly. They were entrusted with sacred authority, assigned to generations as heavenly witnesses to nurture the unfolding of God's covenant with humanity. But some of them, in their watching, began to desire what they were never meant to possess. Drawn by the beauty of the daughters of men, a company of 200 watchers made a pact, an oath of rebellion, sealed upon Mount Hermon, swearing together that they would descend and take wives from among mankind. Their leader, Shemihaza, presided over this covenant, and beneath him stood the infamous Azazel, who would later become the symbol of blame, the scapegoat of nations, yet whose hands were stained with the origins of corruption. These angels abandoned their stations in heaven. They forsook the light of their glory for the touch of mortal flesh. And in doing so, they broke the first spiritual law, that heaven and earth, though intertwined, must never be merged by force. Their union with humanity produced a race the earth had never seen, giants known as the Nephilim, not simply tall in stature, but monstrous in nature. They devoured the labor of men, consumed the creatures of the field, and eventually turned upon humanity itself. Violence filled the earth, not as a symptom of culture, but as the fruit of corrupted bloodlines. The DNA of creation itself had been defiled. But physical corruption was only the beginning. These fallen watchers brought with them forbidden knowledge, arcane mysteries that had been sealed in heaven for a reason. Jubilees and other ancient texts record that Azazel taught men to make weapons of war, swords, knives, and breastplates, transforming disputes into bloodshed. Others among them taught enchantments, root-cutting, astrology, and the signs of the stars. They taught men how to manipulate nature, how to read omens, how to pierce the boundary between realms that God had once declared closed. Women were taught to adorn themselves with paints and jewelry, designed not for beauty, but seduction. The innocence of earth was lost beneath a tide of unnatural wisdom. And as this knowledge spread, so did chaos. Civilizations began to rise, not around the worship of the Most High, but around the worship of the fallen, gods made in the image of these rebels, temples built on blood-soaked altars, human sacrifice justified by celestial lies. The earth groaned beneath the weight of it. The soil that once birthed grain now cried out with the blood of innocence. The heavens heard the cries. And God, who had been patient with the wandering of men, now issued a command against the rebellion of angels. The judgment was swift. Archangels were dispatched to bring order. Michael, Raphael, Uriel, and Gabriel were each given tasks of divine enforcement. Gabriel was to destroy the Nephilim, cutting off their influence before it could spread further. Raphael was assigned to bind Azazel and cast him into the abyss of Dudael, a pit of darkness sealed with jagged stones, where his face would never again see light. Shemihaza and the rest of the Watchers were to be imprisoned in the valleys of the earth, beneath chains of fire and silence, where they would remain until the day of final judgment. Jubilees states clearly that these angels were not killed. They were restrained, held in torment, conscious of their crime, awaiting the day when the court of heaven would pronounce their eternal sentence. But even with the Watchers bound, the corruption they introduced did not vanish. Their offspring, those hybrid giants, left devastation in their wake, and their spirits, once their bodies perished, became the unclean spirits that roam the earth, seeking rest, sowing destruction, whispering chaos. These are the spirits Jesus would later confront. Demons who remembered the glory they had lost and trembled before the one who held the keys to their fate. And though the heavens had responded with holy fire, the damage was done. The chain of righteous generations had been contaminated. The purity of the human race, through which the promise of salvation would one day come, now teetered on the brink of extinction. Only Noah remained undefiled, perfect in his generations, not merely in morality, but in lineage. He became the last hope, a man protected by divine grace and angelic guardianship. Through him, the seed of the woman would continue. Through him, the earth would be washed. Through him, the story would not end in ruin, but the rebellion of the Watchers would echo throughout time. Their names would be feared in ancient traditions, their crimes retold in apocryphal visions, their judgment referenced by apostles and prophets alike. Jude would write of the angels who left their first estate. Peter would warn of those bound in chains under darkness. And even the early church fathers understood that the spiritual war raging in the New Testament had its roots in the ancient fall that Jubilees dared to unveil. This fall was not symbolic. It was historic. It was not myth. It was treason. Celestial beings, clothed in light, traded glory for desire and planted the seeds of corruption that would challenge heaven itself. And yet, even in judgment, heaven remembered mercy. The flood would reset the world, but not erase the record. The angels who remained faithful continued their missions. The scrolls continued to be written. The Watchers, now imprisoned, would become a sign, a warning to any who would challenge the boundaries of the Most High. Jubilees holds this mystery not to provoke fear, but to open our eyes. For the corruption that began in the days of the Watchers still lingers, whispering through false wisdom, occult knowledge, and the age-old hunger to break through what God has sealed. But heaven is not silent, and the angels who watch now do so with greater vigilance, for they remember what happened when trust was broken, when holy guardians became rebels, and when the earth itself was forced to weep beneath the weight of betrayal. There are scrolls in heaven that do not comfort, do not promise, do not sing, they accuse. They are heavy with ink made not of pigment, but of transgression. Every broken vow, every silent injustice, every altar torn down, every innocent cry unanswered. In the hidden corridors of the Book of Jubilees, we are introduced to a chilling order of angels, not those who heal, not those who guide, but those who record with unsparing detail and deliver testimony before the Most High. These angels are not passive scribes nor poetic chroniclers. They are divine witnesses, assigned to nations and generations, and their mission is terrifyingly clear: to weigh the moral gravity of kingdoms, to gather the evidence of sin, and to bring forth the scrolls of accusation when the hour of reckoning arrives. Every law given is written not only in stone, but in heaven. And every violation of that law, though hidden from human courts, echoes before the throne through the testimony of these angels. Jubilees unveils that when a covenant is established, be it with Adam, Noah, Abraham, or Israel, heaven responds not only with celebration, but with delegation. An angel is assigned to guard the covenant, to monitor its fulfillment, and to record its every transgression. And when that covenant is broken, it is not forgotten. It is sealed in ink, carried by the angel of witness, and preserved until the appointed time. The flood in Noah's generation was not simply the result of a world gone wild. It was the execution of a verdict. Angels had watched in silence as violence consumed the earth, as giants ravaged the innocent, as the divine order was turned into mockery. They had brought warnings, they had intervened. But when every call to repentance was ignored, the Watchers who remained faithful took their scrolls, filled with the cries of the afflicted, the blasphemies of the wicked, and the desecrations of holy things, and laid them before the court of heaven. The decision was not rash, it was judicial. The waters of judgment were the gavel of God, and the same pattern unfolds again and again across the arc of sacred history. When Sodom burned, it was not only because of wickedness, it was because the weight of evidence had reached its tipping point. The angels had walked its streets, they had heard the threats, they had seen the desecration, and when their scrolls were opened, the fire was justified. Jubilees whispers a sobering truth, that every city, every nation, every generation is under divine observation. And not just observation, but evaluation. The angels see what rulers ignore, they hear what historians forget, and when the balance is tipped, they move. Some testify on behalf of righteousness, others bring the accusation. There are angels who stand in court not as defenders, but as prosecutors, and they do not miss a single offense. Every false measure, every exploited poor, every child offered to idols, every unjust law, every unrepented lie. It is written, and once written, it is preserved. Jubilees even hints that these scrolls are not merely for heaven, but will one day be opened before the world. Revelation echoes this, declaring books will be opened at the final judgment. And among them will be the scrolls carried by these angels of testimony, their words not poetic, but precise, their records not symbolic, but real. For God does not judge in rage, He judges in truth, and truth must be witnessed. These angels fulfill that role. They are terrifying not because they are cruel, but because they are exact. Jubilees reminds us that Israel itself was warned through such angels. When the people turned to idols, abandoned Sabbaths, and shed innocent blood, the prophets were not the only ones sounding the alarm. The angels recorded every offense. They saw kings break covenant, priests defile the altar, people oppress the weak, and they wrote. When Babylon came, it was not by might alone. It was by decree. A decree first spoken in heaven when the scrolls of accusation were read and judgment was dispatched through nations like swords. These angels are not forgotten. They are still present, watching, writing, and perhaps even now, preparing to present their scrolls again. For the same sins still cry out. Injustice still reigns in palaces. Truth is still silenced in courts. The weak are still crushed beneath the wheels of the powerful, and heaven still sees. When the books are opened, it will not be abstract guilt that is judged. It will be specific. Every action measured, every silence considered, every opportunity wasted, every kindness withheld. And yet, amidst this dread, there is hope. Jubilees also speaks of those whose lives are recorded for reward, of those whose names are written in the book of life, of those whose obedience, though unnoticed on earth, fills pages in heaven. For just as there are scrolls of accusation, there are scrolls of vindication. Angels do not only record sin, they record faithfulness. But the warning stands: no one escapes the books. No nation rises above them. No generation passes unnoticed. And when the angels bring forth the scrolls, it will not be for discussion. It will be for judgment. Jubilees pulls back the veil to show us that history is not shaped merely by armies or kings, but by the quiet writing of heaven's scribes. They hold in their hands the fates of nations. And when their testimony is read, even the earth itself groans in anticipation. The flood was not wrath out of nowhere. It was justice delivered by those who had watched too long in silence. And so, they wait again, their scrolls filling, the balance being weighed. How long before the next reading? How long before the ink becomes fire? Only heaven knows. But the angels are ready. When the waters of judgment receded and the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat, the world stood as a cleansed canvas, awaiting the next movement of divine providence. But the reordering of creation did not fall into the hands of men alone. According to the Book of Jubilees, the division of the earth among the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, was not a mere family inheritance or political compromise. It was a sacred act overseen by heaven itself. Angels were dispatched as divine surveyors, carrying with them maps not drawn in sand, but revealed from prophecy, measured not by conquest, but by covenant. These angels marked out the territories of nations yet unborn, assigning lands not only by geography, but by spiritual destiny. They foresaw the future boundaries of kingdoms, the rise and fall of empires, the fault lines of rebellion, and the sacred centers of worship. With exactitude beyond human comprehension, they divided continents, charted rivers, marked mountains, and inscribed every assignment into the heavenly tablets, scrolls that still exist before the throne of the Most High. To Shem and his descendants were given the lands of covenant, the future dwelling places of prophets, temples, and the coming Messiah. To Japheth, the isles and coastlands stretching toward the north and west. To Ham, the rich regions of the south, lands of power, but also of spiritual testing. Each inheritance was balanced by divine intention, a reflection of the roles each lineage would play in the unfolding story of redemption and judgment. But with the passing of generations, men forgot the division, or rather, they chose to defy it. Nimrod, a mighty man on the earth, became the first to challenge the heavenly boundaries. He gathered people under his authority, not by divine appointment, but by domination. Jubilees recounts how cities began to rise not as centers of worship, but as fortresses of rebellion. And then came Babel, a tower, a city, a declaration. It was not simply a structure of brick and mortar, it was an act of spiritual insurrection. "Let us make a name for ourselves," they said, seeking to reach the heavens, to establish unity without submission, dominion without obedience. But the angels who had once divided the earth did not remain silent. Their role was not only to assign, it was to enforce. And as the tower rose, so did the alarms of heaven. This was not the unifying of brotherhood. It was the centralization of rebellion. It was a return to the sin of the Watchers, an attempt to merge realms, to claim what was never granted. And so, the angels descended not to negotiate, but to scatter. The confusion of language was not a punishment of petty frustration. It was a surgical strike against unauthorized unification. Heaven had drawn the lines, man had erased them. The angels redrew them, this time not with words, but with tongues, scattering families into tribes, nations, and tongues so that none could again seize what heaven had forbidden. Jubilees declares that the boundaries of nations were sacred, and to cross them in defiance was to provoke heaven's judgment. When later generations rose, Assyria, Egypt, Babylon, Greece, Rome, they did so by erasing those ancient lines, seizing lands not given to them, building towers of empire that reached beyond their portion. And again, the angels moved, not always with immediate fire, but always with resistance. Wars were permitted, kingdoms were overturned, prophets were raised to cry out. "Woe to those who move boundary stones," said the law. Not only physical stones, but the spiritual boundaries laid by angels. The inheritance of nations was not only a geographical reality, it was a heavenly decree. And these decrees were recorded in books that still exist in the courts of God. Even now, Jubilees whispers, there are territories marked by angelic assignment, watched over by principalities, guarded by powers not of this world. Not every spiritual force that rules over a region is fallen. Some were placed there by God. But when those territories are seized, abused, or desecrated, the angels still record, they still respond. The spiritual resistance that stirs in the heart of a nation when it strays from its purpose is not merely sociological, it is angelic. Some wars are not just political, they are judgments unfolding according to long-forgotten scrolls. And yet, through all this, the pattern remains. God assigns, angels enforce, men choose. And when the choices violate the assignment, consequences follow. Jubilees shows that the earth is not neutral ground. It is divided by heaven, and those who honor those divisions walk in peace. Those who defy them enter into conflict not only with men, but with the Watchers who still stand guard over the boundaries of prophecy. Babel fell, not by sword, but by divine confusion, but every tower since then has been built in its shadow. And every empire that rises without heaven's blessing builds its own fall into its foundation. For the angels who divided the earth did not vanish. They remain, waiting, watching, and when the lines are crossed again, they will respond, as they always have, long before the thunder rolled on Mount Sinai, long before Moses stood trembling at the foot of divine fire, long before Israel camped in the wilderness, awaiting commandments from the cloud. The law already existed, etched not in stone, but in eternity. The Book of Jubilees unveils a mystery that shatters the assumption of origin. The Torah was not born at Sinai, it was revealed. It was not introduced to the world in the wilderness. It was simply unveiled to a people long removed from the rhythm of heaven. According to Jubilees, the law, every statute, ordinance, precept, and command was already written in celestial tablets, safeguarded by angels who had kept it since the dawn of creation. These were not laws invented to restrain Israel, they were the reflection of divine order itself. In the very first week of the world, before man had sinned, before Eden's gates had closed, the Sabbath was sanctified, not for Jews, not for Levites, but for all creation. The angels rejoiced over it. They kept it holy. It was their rest as much as God's, not because he needed to pause, but because rest was the crown of all completed purpose. Jubilees tells us that this holy day was guarded in heaven before it was ever broken on earth. The pattern of 6 and 1, the rhythm of labor and sanctification, was not a cultural practice but a heavenly cycle. Every law, every feast, every offering, every sacred ordinance was modeled after a heavenly counterpart. When Moses ascended Mount Sinai, he was not stepping into the unknown. He was being reintroduced to a kingdom he had never seen, but whose pattern echoed in his soul. The angel of the presence, who stood before the throne of God, did not speak of new things, but old, ancient things, forgotten things. He showed Moses the records, tablets not carved by human hands, but by fire and spirit, upon which were written the law that sustains the universe. It was these records that Moses transcribed into human language. He did not invent them. He did not interpret them. He translated them from eternity into time. And so, the commandments were given, not as chains, but as invitations. Invitations to walk in the same path the angels walk, to align the rhythm of earthly life with the eternal cadence of heaven. The Sabbath, Jubilees says, was a sign, not just for Israel, but for the righteous of all nations. It was a boundary that reminded creation of its creator, a pause that realigned time with purpose. And yet, it was one of the first commands to be profaned. Generations forgot it. Nations defiled it. And so, the angels who had once rejoiced in its observance became witnesses of its violation. But the law did not pass away. The festivals, Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, the Feast of Weeks, were not invented in the wilderness. Jubilees insists they were already known in heaven. They were anniversaries of heavenly events, memorials of divine acts, appointments set before the foundation of the world. The angels kept them. The patriarchs, instructed by these angels, observed them long before the law was codified. Abraham kept the Sabbath. Isaac offered righteous sacrifices. Jacob observed purity and tithed in reverence, not because of Sinai, but because the knowledge was preserved, passed down, taught by the messengers of God, who walked with them in dreams and visions. Even the laws of purity and justice, the rules that seem most foreign to modern minds, were reflections of the heavenly court. Jubilees declares that the angels live by order. Nothing in heaven is casual. There is structure, there is sequence, there is holiness. And that holiness requires boundaries, not to restrain joy, but to protect glory. The law was given so that the presence of God could dwell among men without consuming them. It was a shield as much as a standard, and the angels who dwell in that presence kept it with joy. So, when Israel received the tablets, they were not burdened with new weight. They were invited to walk the old paths, the paths that Enoch walked, that Noah honored, that Abraham understood. The law was not strange. It was familiar to those who knew God. But as time passed, men corrupted it. They twisted the law into legalism, weaponized it for control, and abandoned the heart behind the command. The Sabbath became a ritual, not a reunion. Sacrifices became a transaction, not a testimony. And yet, the law still stood. The angels still upheld it. Jubilees reveals that every time the law is violated, it is not just a personal sin. It is a disruption of the harmony between heaven and earth. The angels grieve, they write, they wait. But they also rejoice when it is honored. When a man keeps covenant, when a family honors the Sabbath, when a nation returns to righteousness, the angels record that too. The scrolls of accusation are not the only scrolls in heaven. There are scrolls of remembrance. Jubilees says they contain the names of the righteous, the deeds of those who honor the ancient order, the praises of those who align with heaven's rhythm. The law was never meant to save. It was meant to reveal, to reflect the character of the Most High, to act as a mirror, a tutor, a guide. And now, through the Messiah, who fulfilled the law in perfect obedience, we see not the cancellation of the law, but its embodiment. He kept the Sabbath not as tradition, but as testimony. He fulfilled the feasts not by abolishing them, but by becoming them. He lived the law not as duty, but as delight. And the angels, who once delivered the tablets to Moses, now bow before the one who is the Word made flesh. Before we continue, if this content has blessed your life, like, comment, and share. Subscribe to the channel, and if you would like to bless the channel, click the Super Thanks button and leave an offering of any amount or become a member. That way, we can continue investing in research and improvements to bless your life even more. For the law, as Jubilees reveals, was never about religion. It was about restoration, about bringing man back into harmony with the eternal. The angels have always known this, and they are still waiting for a generation who will remember what was written before Sinai, before stone, before time. The law was written in heaven first, and to those who seek it in spirit and in truth, its light will never fade. There is a war older than kingdoms, deeper than bloodlines, more insidious than the thirst for power. It is the war for memory. For within the forgotten vaults of time, the true battlefield is not always seen in swords and armies, but in scrolls and silence. The Book of Jubilees lifts the veil on this hidden war, revealing a profound and haunting reality. The divine records that angels once revealed to the righteous have not merely been lost, they have been targeted. These were not just books, they were blueprints of divine order, testimonies of covenant, judgments recorded, instructions given before the foundation of nations. From the moment heaven entrusted its archives to mankind through angelic mediation, spiritual forces opposed their preservation. What began as divine revelation became a target of cosmic rebellion. Jubilees implies that after the giving of the law, after the days of Enoch and Noah, after the scrolls were recorded and passed to the patriarchs, dark powers began a campaign not of brute destruction, but of erasure. The enemy did not always burn the pages, he buried them. He cloaked them in obscurity, severed their meaning through language, confused their chronology, and reshaped their appearance through counterfeit traditions. As centuries passed, the sacred calendar was replaced by pagan calculations. The appointed feasts were corrupted, renamed, or forgotten altogether. The names of the faithful angels who once walked beside man, Michael, Uriel, Raguel, Phanuel, were stripped from liturgy and cast into the shadows. And the scrolls themselves, many of which detailed the true story of creation, covenant, and corruption, were sealed away or cast out by those who deemed them inconvenient to their rising empires of religion or rule. This was not accidental. Jubilees suggests it was orchestrated, a deliberate movement from the unseen realm to sever the connection between man and the heavenly records that once guided him. The goal was not simply to confuse doctrine, it was to erase memory. Because what is a people without memory? They become driftwood on the tide of history, easily manipulated, quickly lost. The war for the books of heaven was not about literacy, it was about identity. To forget the original calendar was to forget divine timing. To forget the original law was to forget divine nature. To forget the original angels was to forget divine order. And with each forgotten scroll, mankind grew more vulnerable to deception. Books were declared apocryphal. Sacred revelations were hidden in caves. Angelic names were mocked, their missions dismissed as myth. And in their place rose substitutes, systems of control, calendars built around emperors, feasts named after idols, and religions divorced from their heavenly source. Even the scriptures that remained were subject to translation errors, deliberate omissions, and the slow drift of interpretation. And all the while, a dark power worked behind the scenes, not to attack with visible armies, but to manipulate time, history, and thought. Jubilees makes clear, this battle is not over paper. It is over the soul's alignment with heaven. For to align with heaven, one must remember. And to remember, one must have access to the records. That is why, in every generation, there have been those who sought to recover the scrolls. Not just scholars, but prophets. Not just historians, but the faithful. Enoch walked with God because he was shown the books. Noah was preserved because he obeyed what was written. Abraham was chosen because he remembered what others had forgotten. Moses was elevated because he was granted access to the tablets of heaven. And even in later generations, those like Ezra, Daniel, and John of Patmos received glimpses of the archives, sealed books, prophetic scrolls, heavenly visions. Yet, even they were warned, some books would remain closed until the time of the end. Why? Because the full revelation of heaven's records would only be granted to a generation willing to walk in holiness, humility, and hunger for truth. The war, then, is not just cosmic, it is personal. Every soul becomes a battlefield between forgetfulness and remembrance. Will you live by the rhythms of heaven or the noise of the world? Will you seek what was written in eternity or settle for what is popular in the present? Jubilees challenges us to consider that we have inherited a fragmented memory, a history edited by rebellion, and the angels, though still watching, await those who will seek the original records, who will ask for restored calendars, who will pray not only for revelation, but for remembrance. For there are still scrolls hidden among the righteous, passed down in secret, whispered through faithful hearts, preserved in places the enemy cannot touch. And in the final generation, those scrolls will surface again. They will not come with applause. They will not be received by the masses, but they will restore what was lost. And when they do, the veil will lift. The war for memory will end. And the story heaven wrote from the beginning will once again be known on earth. For now, the battle rages. But the scrolls have not vanished. They are waiting. And the angels who first delivered them are ready to speak again. To those with ears to hear, the call is simple. Remember, from the first dawn of creation, when the breath of God stirred the dust into man and light separated from darkness, there has been one angel appointed to a final task, an archangel not of battle, nor merely of comfort, but of revelation. The Book of Jubilees whispers of this being in veiled tones, suggesting that the scrolls kept secret since the beginning will not remain sealed forever. There will come a moment when the books are opened, not with ceremony, but with divine finality. And it will be this angel, chosen before time began, who will unseal them. He will not come with new declarations, for there is no need for novelty when all has been written. His task will be to reveal what has already been said, what has already been judged, what has already been recorded by the watchers who never slept, and the scribes of heaven who never ceased to write. The scrolls will be opened one by one before heaven and earth, not in secret chambers, but in the full light of eternity. The Book of Wars will declare every conflict heaven authorized and every battle waged in defiance. The Book of Rebellion will recount every instance a nation turned from its divine assignment, every time truth was traded for power, every altar torn down for the sake of self. The Book of Covenants will resound with both the promises made and the betrayals committed, each vow remembered, each compromise recorded in fire. And the Book of the Righteous will shine with the names of those who remained faithful when the world forgot. This judgment will not be arbitrary. It will be a remembering. There will be no need for witnesses to testify, for the scrolls will speak. The angels who once only watched will now rise as witnesses. They will recount what they saw, not in anger, but in precision. They will speak the names. They will recall the moments. The secrets once hidden in shadows will be proclaimed in the courts of eternity. Jubilees describes not just a day of judgment, but a day of unveiling, when every spiritual force, every ruler, every soul will be confronted not by accusation, but by documentation. The past cannot be erased, only forgiven. And the forgiven will stand not in fear, but in glory. For those who align their lives with heaven's order, who kept the Sabbath not as ritual, but as covenant, who honored the laws written before Sinai, who remembered the names of the holy angels, who yearned for the true calendar of God, who listened to the whispers of eternity while the world shouted lies, those will shine like stars, not because they were perfect, but because they walked in the rhythm of heaven. The angel of revelation will point to their names, written in gold, remembered forever. But those who defied that order, who rejected the scrolls, who erased the days of holiness, who mocked the prophets and exalted the corrupt, who built towers to their own names and trampled the inheritance of nations, they will tremble. Not because they are surprised, but because they will recognize what they had forgotten. The truth was always near. The books were never far. The angels had always been watching. And now the silence breaks. The archangel opens the final scroll, not to search, but to declare. The Lamb, who alone has authority to break the seals, will stand in judgment, not as a stranger, but as the one who walked with the patriarchs, who taught the angels their song, who authored the very books now unsealed. And the judgment will be absolute. The earth itself will respond. Mountains will shake, seas will flee, stars will fall, not because they are afraid, but because they understand the gravity of divine remembrance. Systems will collapse, thrones will be overturned, every mask will fall, the books will remain. For the scrolls of heaven are not temporary, they are eternal reflections of the Most High's unchanging gaze. And the angel who reveals them does not speak on his own. He speaks the words that were written long before the earth knew kings or empires. He speaks with the authority of the Ancient of Days. Jubilees tells us that what was sealed will be revealed, not for curiosity, but for justice. The secrets hidden in Eden, The mysteries of Enoch's visions, the unspoken names of the faithful, the forgotten sins of cities long buried, they will all rise. For nothing hidden shall remain concealed. The books are waiting, the angel is ready. The question is not if, but when. And when he stands, scroll in hand, the only thing that will matter is what has already been written. There is a final thread woven through the sacred pages of Jubilees, one not shouted from mountaintops nor proclaimed to the crowds, but whispered in reverence, carried in silence by those who fear the Lord, a secret not forgotten, but reserved. The angels whose hands bore the scrolls of heaven, whose eyes witnessed the rise and fall of generations, whose voices have echoed the decrees of the Most High since the dawn of time, were given a command. Reveal these records not to the rebellious, not to the curious, not to the powerful or proud, but only to the righteous. The scrolls were never intended for casual eyes. They are not open histories. They are holy inheritances. What they contain is not mere knowledge, but revelation sealed with covenant. The Book of Jubilees itself is proof of this mystery, for it was hidden for ages, buried beneath ruins, silenced by councils, erased from popular memory, not because it lacked truth, but because its truth was reserved. God, in His wisdom, ordained that the most precious insights would not be cast like pearls before those who would trample them. And so, the angels faithful to their mission guarded the knowledge. They preserved the divine calendar when the world embraced false time. They safeguarded the names of the watchers when mankind chose to forget them. They carried the memory of the heavenly law when even Israel faltered in obedience. And now, in the final hours of history's great drama, they stir again, ready to reveal, but only to those who are ready to receive. For this is not a secret hidden by cruelty. It is a secret protected by holiness. It is not for the wicked to dissect. It is for the covenant keepers to inherit. The scrolls of heaven are alive. They burn with the fire of the presence. They echo with the voices of angels. And they will only unfold their pages to hearts clothed in humility, obedience, and awe. Jubilees makes it clear. Those who walk in righteousness will understand. Those who love the Lord's commands, who honor His feasts, who remember His Sabbath, who revere His messengers, they will be granted access to the hidden things. Not because they are elite, but because they are aligned. Their lives are calibrated to heaven's order. Their ears are tuned to the frequency of eternity. Their hearts do not seek secret knowledge for pride, but for obedience. And to them, the angels reveal what was written long before ink touched scroll. They speak of the years appointed for judgment. They recall the prophecies buried beneath empire and religion. They restore the divine structure that the world discarded, and they do so in secret, not because God is secretive, but because truth is holy. This is why even now, those who stumble across the words of Jubilees, those who begin to see the patterns of divine time, those who recognize the voices of angels hidden in the text, feel something awaken within them. It is not intellectual curiosity, it is spiritual memory. It is the echo of Eden, the pull of Sinai, the song of a forgotten covenant. It is the realization that the kingdom of God was never absent, only hidden from those who would not walk uprightly. And so, the angels continue their mission, not in trumpets and fanfare, but in stillness and clarity. They are looking for those who will steward the records rightly, for those who will honor the scrolls not as relics, but as revelations. For those who will say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Because the scrolls are ready, the seals are loosening, the memories are returning, the judgment has already begun, not in future fire, but in present exposure. The light is shining, and the books are opening for those with eyes to see. The final mystery of Jubilees is not what is hidden. It is who the hidden was for. And now you must ask, are you ready to receive what the angels have preserved? Are you walking in the covenant that aligns heaven and earth? Are you among the righteous, to whom the records were always meant to return? For the day is coming when the scrolls will no longer whisper, they will roar, and only those who walked in the rhythm of heaven will understand their song.